anniversary which we're celebrating this year, set out to abolish the power of life and death as exerted arbitrarily by the state and the monarch and the divine right of the ruling class. It was the signal achievement of the bourgeois revolution, which led to the industrial and capitalist revolutions, to challenge that and say, no, you don't have the right of life and death over the citizen. You don't have what feudalism called, it couldn't call itself feudalism, because it didn't have enough self-consciousness, the justice of the high, the middle, and the low, where these powers are arrogated to the lords and powers spiritual and temporal. Now, we've actually relapsed from that as history has progressed. Everyone in this room today is in effect in a uniform and also has been placed in a front-line trench. The nuclear state, the thermonuclear state, the plutonium state, under which we actually live, but for which we cannot vote, and in whose consuming and producing affairs we have no say and no role, has arrogated to itself the power of life and death over all of us, all day and all night, and now for many years. Has also denied us the right to make inquiry about it. And we're really never, any of us, more than quite a few minutes away, in spite of some fine-tuning done recently by the arms control professional, never very far from the moment when it could well be that, as the great philosopher of the subject said, the living might envy the dead, and those of us who were among the living might find ourselves praying, in many cases for the first time, to die. Now, who is going to say that the system I've just sketched, I have only time to sketch it in? And those contradictions and contrasts that are permanent and deeply inscribed in it, who's going to say that that system has put itself beyond the reach, beyond the need for the humanist, rationalist, socialist critique? I don't believe any honest person thinks that it's put itself anywhere near the point where it could claim to be immune from these criticisms. I think it's mere complacency and solipsism for its defenders to say so. I think in doing so they deceive themselves and attempt to deceive you. Still, the system has its defenders, the system of state monopoly capitalism, coupled with the war economy, which is the main engine of its prosperity in the post-slump period. Has its defenders, and they deserve their honor, in my opinion, because it may be asking too much of capital to solve all its contradictions. But if it isn't the same as free enterprise, because you can have free enterprise under any system, because of the human tendency to wish to accumulate, and if you can't have free enterprise under capitalism because of capitalism's renowned tendency to monopoly and to dependency upon the state, that's to say the identity of it with free enterprise and entrepreneurship is propaganda only, because capital is monopoly, capital is partnership with statism and collectivism, as in Japan, as in Taiwan, as in Singapore, as in Hong Kong, as in all the instances given by Mr. D'Souza, the success stories of what are in fact programmed economies, grown up under the American war economy umbrella, parasitic upon it, entirely dependent on the collusion of state and monopoly. Now, nor is it, therefore, so capitalism isn't that, whatever its defenders may say. It's not free enterprise and entrepreneurship and the unleashed human will. Nor is it the correspondence in political economy to human nature, which is what people like Friedman and to some extent von Hayek have argued for it. Because if that were so, why has it only evolved in a very few societies in the last century and a half? Why has it simply failed to establish itself as a system anytime, anywhere before the 19th century, and since the 19th century only in a few countries, and in most of those countries in a maimed and calamitous and catastrophic form, such as in pre-revolution Russia and China, where the only form of capital accumulation available after the complete collapse of the capitalist system was forced accumulation by means of socialist and dirigist planning. These are questions that Mr. D'Souza doesn't even seem to think are interesting, because if capitalism is human nature, there's nothing really to argue about, is there? There would be really almost nothing for us to discuss. I think we can, however, we can prove by indirection, by intuition. Whatever it is, it isn't simply the conformity of human nature to political economy. So what is it? It's a system really that emerges from the coincidence between the Industrial Revolution and modern imperialism. Now, I just want to ask, because I don't want to overrun my time, whether that system, born out of the Industrial Revolution and its coincidence with empire, which is what we talk about in real historic time, whether it has outlived any of the 5 or 6 keywords I cited at the start, and I'll be as I'll be as cryptic as I can without I hope, being vulgar. Exploitation, for example. Exploitation is not a moral term, though it's quite useful in moral discourse. It simply means the rate at which people are deprived of the due that is theirs for their labor, for the investment of the only thing they've got, in the case of most human beings, their ability to work, and work for others. Now, I'll give just one example. It was cited by the World Bank earlier this year that the total of all foreign aid given to just the Latin American continent in the last 5 years was approximately 1/20th. The total of all foreign aid was 1/20th of what those same Latin American countries had to repay to Western banks in the form not of debt repaid, but of the servicing of the interest on those debts. That is a good working definition. I'd be willing to be challenged upon it, of what is meant by the process of exploitation. It's not a moral point. It's a point about how you're prepared to live with your fellow citizens in other countries, and fellow humans, fellow creatures in other countries, certainly. It has moral to that extent, but it's also an index of the rate at which people are deprived of what is due to them for their ability to work for others. Class, another key word I mentioned. Well, everyone in America appears to know what class they're not in. And some say that it's by denying that they have a class system that the thing keeps limping on at all. But everyone usually has some idea of what the class above and immediately below them is, and certainly recently there's been an idea that there might be such a thing as an underclass, which you can't have if you don't have any other kind of class, it seems, at any rate to me, and which has a certain marginal utility for politics, in that if you create an underclass, as Reagan and Bush did, and make it larger, you can then run against it, because what you've created is quite frightening. And having, as it were, invented Mr. Horton, you can also recycle him. This is, I think, a condemnation of the politics as well as the economics of the class system, and also brings one to a second word, which is often misused too, which is that of alienation. How do you actually want to live with your fellow humans? I mean, what sort of relationship with them do you want to have? Do you simply want to say, well, you take your chances and I'll take mine, and we'll all meet at infinity, which is roughly the mandate that's being proposed to you? I don't think so. The market isn't actually going to take care of that to infinity. You'll meet these people again down the road and wish you'd thought about them the first time. That's our point about the 60s. That's the price of giving up the war on poverty the last time round. We're paying that price now because people weren't prepared to think as socialists about their fellows and think of what proportion of the social product might be used in which ways. Everyone instead in their own cave, atomized, anomic, pretending to be individual, autonomous, and at liberty, and being really nothing of the kind. And when we think of all the literature on this and the lonely crowd and the rest of it, realize we've been collectivized and atomized at the same time and in the same way, I don't think we can say that the word alienation is a word that capitalism has managed to outlive either. As for use value and exchange value, anyone who's looked at that distinction as made in the original critique, and has then looked at what's been happening to the American economy in the last few years with an enormous process of making money and producing nothing, an enormous redistribution of paper resources from poor to rich, a gigantic accumulation of non-wealth from non-production for falsely conceived goals, will not treat with contempt the idea that use value and exchange value are nonsense categories, or categories that capitalism has learned to do without or has transcended. These are important to understanding the way we live now. The conflict between the forces and relations of production, which is the center of the socialist critique, actually is best applied at the moment, I think, to the state-ified economies of Eastern Europe, on which D'Souza spent some time, because there it's become self-evident that the materialist critique is correct, that there is a conflict between the relations of production, the party state, and the nationalization of the contradictions, the statifying of the contradiction, and the possible development of the actual productive resources in concert with others. And it is that conflict between the forces and relations of production that has led to the greatest political change in the post-war period. It is that, not the mercenaries of the CIA blowing up bridges, nor the pointing of plutonium weapons.